I'm here to talk about ink, and I'm not an expert on ink or anything like that, so I didn't know which way to go with this theme. So I say, well, I'm going to talk about ink from my point of view and my experience, and so let me start with baby steps from Crayolas to ink. When I was raised in Tijuana, Mexico, the most visited border in the whole planet. Tijuana is not that small. We're close to 3.5 million people, so it's a quite big city, and you can see how it's divided. The left side is San Isidro, or San Diego, and the right side is Tijuana. When I was growing up, there was 2 bull rings and 2 arenas where there was wrestling, and so I grew up, with that. I know it's not cool, the bull rings anymore, but it was part of the culture. 70s and the 80s, to cross the border was 2 hours, 3 hours. Now it can be even up to 6 hours from Tijuana to San Diego. That was me when I was 4 years old, and this was my computer. I was limited to 8 colors. I didn't know better. I don't come from a family that was creative or anything like that. My first drawings with Crayolas looked like this, 4 or 5. I lived next to a wrestling stadium and arena, and this is me. I know, isn't it cool? And so I really wanted to create these new names for these wrestlers and get into the way they dress and whatnot. So I asked my parents if I can go from 8 to 68, I believe, or 64, so I needed more colors. And it was a big deal. I was 8 years old. It was hard to find these in Tijuana, so they brought these from San Diego. I used to see them in the television ads when I was watching cartoons. And so with this range of colors during this period of time, I was doing this kind of stuff. And I guess it's the early days of branding for me, because I was developing names for the wrestlers. I was creating these different textures and patterns for them. I even had a little logo down there for Louis Fitch. Later, after that period of time, discovering Picasso and Dali were my first artists that I was influenced by, and disco, believe it or not. We didn't have museums or galleries, and if we had them, I don't remember going in Tijuana. So for us to look for art, we had to go to San Diego, and there's a place in San Diego called Balboa Park. If you've ever been there, highly recommend it. There's a bunch of museums there, and one time we went, and there was an exhibit of Picasso. And I knew about Picasso because my parents gave me a book when I was young. But when I saw these bull rings art, I relate to it because like I said, I've been going in Tijuana to see these, but to see this master that I was so impressed by and doing it in ink, it just blew me away. And then later I discovered that another guy from Spain, Dali, was doing similar things, a little bit more surreal and really out there when it came to playing with ink. And so I was still playing with Crayolas, and it's like, whoa, ink is the thing. Ink is the media. I gotta do that. At the same time, I was growing up with my parents. This is the music that we were hearing at home. These are 4 of albums that I remember growing up with during that period of time, and I just devoured the designs of these albums. The Saturday Night Fever logo type, it was just, incredible for me. the hyper-realistic images of Cher. You know, there's a picture, and then they go in there with airbrush, and I was just fascinated with all this stuff. Andy Warhol's, you know, obviously using brush strokes and silk screen and whatnot, and then salsa, you know. So from disco to salsa, we had it all at home. And it was really cool for me to go through these albums and saying, wow, you know, there's somebody designing this and taking pictures and art directing, and that's really what I wanted to do. The funny thing that later, when I went to Art Center in the early 80s, I mean late 80s, I find out that my instructors were the same people who designed these albums. So it was really, really interesting. So discovering ink. Believe it or not, my first encounter with ink was with squid in inks. It's a famous Spanish plate. We have in Tijuana, it's gone, but in the 80s, it started in the 50s. It's called Jai. It's a game from Spain. And the players used to hang out across the street at this little restaurant called Chiqui High. And it's still around. It's 77 years now in Tijuana. If you ever go there, highly recommend it. It's Spanish food. And one of the things that you could hardly see, it's the squid in ink. And my parents always used to get it, and it just looked really weird. And so I'm talking, I'm 10 or 11. And I put my finger on it, and I put it in the napkin. It's like, wow, this is ink. This is the same thing that Picasso and Dali used, right? I was trying to put it together like that. And my parents say, no, that's not. This is squid ink. And if you want some, we have them at home. It's like, whoa, you know, so I was like blown away. So I went home. I was 11 years old. This is 1976. I didn't know where to find art materials in Tijuana or in San Diego for that matter. But definitely that was my first inspiration of playing with ink, and highly not recommended. So it's smelly and it's thick, and it's not appropriate for it. So my second option was this, leather chew dye, El Oso. It's a Mexican brand. Some people are gonna know that. My designers say, yeah. And so with that little thing, the sponge, it was just incredible. You can do typography, and I know some graffiti artists in Mexico still use this for tags and things like that. So that was my first encounter with ink. It's very messy. If you don't know what you're doing, you know, your house is going to get really dirty. Once my parents saw that I was, you know, messing around with inks, they say, wait a minute, what you want is this. And my mom had a Mont Blanc that her parents gave them when she was young. And this is in 1978 when I first was introduced to real ink, and I was given that first pen. With that pen, I was just amazed that there was all these ink colors that you can buy, and the things that you can do with the ink. And so 1 pass, 2 passes, 3 passes, what it looked like, 5 seconds so it dries, or not dry actually, 30 seconds, and then 1 minute to really dry. So I really I needed to experiment and get into it, but I really didn't care. What I was doing is still throwing ink. And so in 1978, I was just experimenting with ink and having a good time. I was 13 years old. And then obviously was doing these without knowing that there was a whole psychology thing behind it. And so I don't know, I see Lincoln and I see the devil, so. Early days of Black Sabbath. I was doing hundreds and hundreds of these, and then whatever I saw, like in this case I saw a rat, I will add little things to make it more obvious for those people who didn't see what I was watching or looking at. Later, in junior high, I got technical with ink. I've always wanted to be a fine artist, or an artist, I should say, and just, you know, throw paint and play with art. And so when I got into junior high, I went to a school that it was the only place that they offer drawing, or technical drawing, I should say. It was the closest I could get to art. And the first year they had a national art competition, and these are the people who won. And they needed they needed to take one person to the nationals, and the students voted for me. This little painting here, it was the most abstract painting of all. This guy, the second guy, didn't make it because they find out his father did that for him. So cheater, you know? Yeah. She didn't make it because she drew Jesus, and this is a federal government school, so forget, religion in Mexico, they're very tight. And I can't remember her, but the only reason I was competing is because I really like her. And so, but anyway, they picked me, people voted for me, and it was with inks, and it was a mess. It was a mixed media, but not because I wanted the mixed media. It was a mess because I didn't know what I was doing. And, but they still won. I went to the nationals and whatnot. Those 3 years in junior high, this is the kind of stuff that I was doing. And so it wasn't like throwing ink and playing and being experimental. This was really technical. And you had to use these technical pens for that. They come in different sizes and whatnot. Once you finish the pencil drawing, you can move ahead and do it in ink. And it was a nightmare. And I was very competitive. I wanted to get 10s on everything. But one little mistake, like this 40 here or anything, that will bring you down. And there was no way to erase it. And if you erased it and try to fool the instructor, he will, he had a good eye, so he will give you an 8 or a 9. I believe I got an 8 on this. But we did, for 3 years, that's all we did. Making money for the first time with ink. Once I graduated from junior high, a summer in 1981, I was 16 years old, and I invested money on this. And this is all the tools. This was my computer during that time. I still use it. I still have it at the office. And that made me a lot of money during this time. This is the kind of stuff I was doing when I was 16, 17 in Tijuana. I was doing advertisement, color plates and whatnot. Then I got into doing logos. And these are logos of that period of time in Tijuana that I was doing by hand with ink. They're still part of my portfolio. Then I wanted to study art, but there was no art schools in Baja. And we moved to San Diego just for me to go to architecture school. And during architecture school, and this is 1978, I was 18 years old, I was doing a lot of sketches. They would put slides of different buildings from the United States, and we had only 3 minutes to draw these really fast, and I was using my Mont Blanc pen here. Quick sketches. This is Chicago, San Diego, Coronado. And then, it's all freehand. There's no rulers or anything like that with ink. Then I got bored, just doing these things. I'm almost going back to when I was doing technical drawings, and I went out and started doing people, start drawing people. And they were freaking out. They were staring at me and looking at me like, who is this guy? So I started doing that too. And I hate realism. I don't know. It's not me. If I can't finish it very quickly, I just give up. And so I wanted to do something more artistic, and I started experimenting more. So that period of time, I started drawing my own people. And I have a series of these that, I did hundreds and hundreds, and people start buying them and collecting them, and had a gallery rep. This is now the 80s, and Tijuana started having little galleries and things like that. So from these sketches, they become paintings, and I was doing large format paintings for a while, using inks, sands, glue, industrial paint, you name it. It was a mix of things. Very dark. My dark, face. I would say in the early 90s, I started creating memories with ink. Any place that I travel, I visit the museums like probably any other creative person does. And this was a painting that I've always wanted to see. You can barely see it, by Diego Velázquez. Was done in 1656. And I was just amazed how he was able to show it almost like a snapshot. And really, the reason I really like it is because there was an interpretation by by Picasso, one of my heroes. And so obviously when I went to Museo del Prado, I wanted to do my interpretation. And so in any experience when I travel, I do these postcards that I send it to myself, and it's a memory of where I've been, and it's registered by their local government, and sometimes there's communications between the post office and us, and hey, you own 35 cents on this, and so it's out of control. But I interviewed when I graduated from school with Ettore Sotzas, and since I was 15, I knew of him. Through Architecture Magazine. She was one of my heroes. Had the opportunity to go to Milan and interview with him. And I was very disappointed. This is how I felt. I felt like I was naked, I was in front of a master. And I was disappointed because his office was so small. I thought there was going to be hundreds of people. And he only offered me like $10,000. It's like, no way, I can't survive with this, And so it's all documented with these postcards that this is Buenos Aires, Argentina, London, Boston, Las Vegas. Chopus, not stopus. One of my first presentations in Mexico for a hypermarket. A visit to Jose Luis Cuevas, another artist that I'm very influenced, and I really like his work. If you're ever in Mexico City, stop by his museum. It's just amazing. Jose Luis Cuevas is his name. He will be our Andy Warhol in a way, if you want to, in the 60s. He was very young and radical, and he was getting away from all the nationalists who were doing murals like the Diego Riveras and all this. Highly recommended to see it. Wisconsin Dale, this is how I felt when I went there. New York City, Nashville, Niagara Falls, Tangier, focus groups. I got hundreds of focus groups. That's all I do is just draw the people in the focus group. This is in Cleveland, Milwaukee. That's not me. This either. Postage due, 23 cents. So when the guy comes over, the postman is like, here, this 23 cents. He's like, what, really? It's just like, my first visit to Minneapolis was 1992. I used to work at Fitch, and we had a lot of prototypes in Mall of America. And so every year, all the designers got to visit the place. I never thought I was going to live here. Philadelphia, another focus group. I'm a big fan of Frank Lloyd Wright, and so I remember when I was studying architecture that he lived in Spring Green, Wisconsin. Highly recommended to go and visit Taliesin, the school that he founded and started. He used to live there, and his first project, what's it called? I forgot what it's called. Windmill? It's a windmill, yeah. That was his first project. He was very young when he did that. He did it for his aunts, and then he kept the land from his aunts once he died. But recommend him. Holland, Morelia, Michoacán, Sevilla, London again. So I have thousands of these drawings. It's the first time I've shared these with anyone. And they're just quick snapshots of where I've been, and it's nice because you can go back to it, and it's like, oh yeah, I even remember exactly when I was doing that. So making money for the second time with ink, these are my instruments. This is what I use when I have the opportunity of not using the computer. I'm terrible with computers, and so I try first to resolve the problem through ink or paper cutting or any other way than computers. But people seem to like it. Most of my licensing that we've got more than 200 licensings, were done this way. And it's just the base was ink, and then Xerox copies, and then scan them, and then put them in the computer, and then change colors and whatnot. When we first started UNO in 1999, we were at the center of what the Latino community was happening East Lake Street in Mercado Central. I don't know how familiar you guys are with the place. But we start doing the posters, and we wanted to do posters that were very minimalistic and with the inks, and very affordable for them to print. And I didn't want it to use computers at all, other than for secondary typography and things like that, or for the printing. But it all started with brushes and ink. Day of the Dead, Day of the Kid. Believe it or not, in Mexico, it's a huge celebration. I'm wondering why we don't have that in the United States. We got Father's Day, Mother's Day, but we don't have Day of the Kid. And in Mexico, Day of the Kid, you don't go to school. And your mom does a cake for you. And it's the day where more pizzas are sold in Mexico than any other day. So it's quite interesting. Talking about kids, 4 years ago, I got an assignment to do what I love, that's wrestling, from Mexico, and they were going to tour these posters around different cities, and they wanted something fresh and new, and I was like, I don't know, I feel that I'm very traditional, and I went to the source. So I asked my son if he wanted to art direct me. He's 8 years old by this time, and I said, Bert, here's the deal. You're going to art direct me, tell me exactly what you want, I'll interpret it, we'll scan it together, we put it together, and but the deal is that in 3 hours, we're going to finish this. And so he went crazy. So there's a lot of stories. I'm not going to get into this. But here we use spray, we use technical drawings, we use scans, we use collage, you name it. We used it. And so it was really fun being art directed by a kid who has all these stories and these crazy things in his head. And then me interpreting what he was trying to say with different medias. We still use ink when it's appropriate for our projects and for commercial art, obviously. And here's a series of suns that we had to do for Malton Meals, third largest cereal company in the United States. And this is how they used it. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Thank you.